This system right here, such a great bang for the buck. The Infiniti Q50 Sedan Cat-back from Fast Intentions. Let's get straight to the point. Welcome back to The Point. I'm Tony with Fast Intentions. Today we're going to dive into a full review on our Infiniti Q50 Cat-back exhaust system for the 2014 through 2022 Q50 sedan. Couple different motor variations in there, all the same Cat-back exhaust system. Some technical stuff, we'll get that out of the way on the tail end of this. Let's talk about the options first and foremost. I know I'm handsy, it's just what I do, it's my thing. So what's pictured here on the table is our 10-inch sport mufflers in polished stainless steel with our standard polished stainless steel tips. This to this day is probably the most hot item in terms of ordering, in terms of installing, in terms of what is overall sent out in volume and numbers. What's also featured here is our 14-inch resonated X-pipe, and that's pretty much it in terms of the options for this specific setup. So let me go into the different variations and show you what we have, and then we'll talk about specifically what you get ordering it one way or the other. So first and foremost, the 10-inch muffler, Sport versus 14 Touring. The Touring muffler was originally prototyped back in 2016. It was a carryover from the Infiniti G37, offset, opposite side, 14 inches long, 5x9 oval, so just try to picture that style canister. As exhaust travels through, it's absorbed into the oval canister. It's not as round, it's sporty looking, it's a little bit more luxury, so to speak. As I've stated many times in the past, this is a luxury sport vehicle, putting a point of emphasis on the word luxury first and foremost. We give you a little bit more ground clearance. It is a sedan after all. We want it to look a little less obtrusive. So with that being said, the 10-inch muffler, 10 inches long, 14-inch muffler, 14 inches long. Pretty simple concept. Sport caught its name because it's a little bit louder. Touring is a little bit on the quieter side. From a performance side, they're going to perform identical. The only difference you're going to notice is one's going to be louder inside the vehicle as well as outside the vehicle. Approximately 20 to 30% overall. Now, the birth of the 10-inch sport muffler came to fruition because we had some calls and we had some feedback over the years between 2016 through the end of 2019 that maybe I'm not running lower downpipes, maybe I'm not running full downpipes, maybe I'm not running a tune. I just want to run a Cat-back and I want to create a little bit more sound volume interior and exterior. So we created this variation here of the 10-inch sport muffler. Doesn't cost any more money or any less. It is a very nice variation to give you the option, and it does exceptionally well in terms of sales. People love it. We got great feedback. Now, the polished stainless steel tips, this is really the nuts and bolts of it. This is what you're going to see out the back. They're 304 stainless steel, as is everything in this entire exhaust system. Everything is precision TIG welded in this entire exhaust system, and there are only two flanges in this entire exhaust system. The flange connection point, which will bolt directly to your factory lower downpipe, or OEM catalytic converter. As I've stated in previous videos, these are completely 100% TIG welded around the outside, and they are popped up to soak up any inconsistency on the inside to reduce or essentially eliminate turbulence at the connection point altogether. Belt sanded down to create efficiency in terms of fitment so we don't have any leaks. We'll dive into the gaskets and the hardware later, but great sealing at the connection point. We have no issues with that whatsoever. And again, this exhaust system is designed to bolt in the end of factory location of your OEM downpipes or any downpipe that's going to end in OEM location. All right, I got a little sidetracked. Let's get back on the tips. So they're 304 polished stainless steel, dual wall, non-resonated tip. Now, what is the difference between a single wall and a dual wall? Well, think of this as an exhaust tip, just in a larger variation. It's one piece of exhaust tubing. It would essentially be single wall. Now, there's no insulation here whatsoever. As the exhaust travels through, the heat and the sound essentially resonates out. Well, what's going to happen here is this going to turn gold over time, relatively quickly, due to the expansion and contraction in the hot and cold cycles of the car. It's going to get to several hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit relatively quickly, especially in a turbocharged application. Now, all single wall exhaust tips are essentially just single wall tubing. Doesn't matter what type of vehicle it's on, the name is synonymous with the amount of tubing in terms of the walls. So this being a dual wall, as you would imagine, it's 2-layer thick. Now we have a layer on the inside, right around the OD of this beauty ring. This is what we call our beauty ring in here. It's polished stainless steel, comes to a 15-degree knife edge. It kind of mimics the back of the bumper to give you a little bit more of that waterfall effect as you would essentially aesthetically look down the back of the car, rather this potato launcher or this giant coffee can looking thing coming out the back. To each their own. I know some people like that look. Personally, I'm not into that aesthetic. We've always rocked this ever since the G35 and 350 days, and it's essentially done very, very well. We've gotten great feedback with it. So the main benefit of running a dual wall tip for aesthetics is from the ID of this interior here and the OD of this exterior here, there's an air gap, there's a cavity. And the objective here is to minimize the amount of golding or yellowing that's gonna happen with the heat transfer. And these do pretty well holding up over time. You generally don't have to go back and polish them out. A Mother's mag and aluminum polish always does an exceptional job in bringing the shine back to all of the polished stainless steel components. You can make them look brand new. As I always say, some customers, they treat it well. They could have 10, 20, 50,000 miles. It'll look brand new. I've seen other systems, they've had 300, 400 miles. They don't look so hot. It's just really how you take care of it and how much effort you're gonna put in to keep it aesthetically pleasing. So the dual wall polished non-resonated tip, it's what we offer standard. And the design of it, obviously, it's a 4.5 inch tip, so it soaks up that cavity really nice, 4.5 inch OD. It's roughly about 7.5 inches long overall. It has a nice smooth taper on the back that accepts the dual 2.5, one on each side respectively. It's all mandrel bent tubing, and it's all 100% TIG welded. Now, our PVD tips, which are not pictured, PVD stands for physical vapor deposition. It's a coating process, and this solid object here is essentially put into a giant vat, so to speak, or a giant tank. And this coating is essentially applied to the outside of it through a vacuuming process. Everything has to be vacuumed down. There has to be zero contaminants in the tank. It's kind of like Skittles. You never know what you're gonna get. If you have our PVD tips, you know. We really try to mate these up as best as we can. The blues with the blues, the purples with the purples, and so on and so forth. And as we receive them, they're done locally here in California. We go through, we pair them, we go through a rigorous QA process because it is an expensive option that most customers have to wait longer for. So we want them to get the best bang for the buck aesthetically with that. We'll do a review later on stainless steel versus PVD. We'll dive more into that. Mufflers are perforated core, straight through, no baffles, no louvers. As exhaust travels through, the gases travel through. They're absorbed through the stainless steel mesh behind the screen into the fiberglass blanket. The sound is absorbed to essentially make its way back out and obviously reduce interior cabin noise and do what its job is intended to do. Muffler is designed to muffle. Now, the resonators, this is our X pipe in front of us. Though the X pipe is not crucial for performance in this turbocharged application, what this balance tube does here, where we're able to equalize the gases and the pulses from both sides of the engine, 3 cylinders on one side, 3 cylinders on the other, this smoothens out the exhaust note. There's a lot of science that goes into this in terms of the opening, the location of the opening, as well as the design of the opening. All of this comes into play into fine-tuning the actual overall sound output, what you're gonna hear out the back of the vehicle. We're always going for more of a European, more of an exotic, more of an aesthetically pleasing note. A little less high-pitched. Our stuff's been known to be a little bit on the deeper side. We are able to fine-tune it out to make it a little bit higher pitched, however, without having it become tingy and hollow and breaking up as you accelerate through RPM. We want to keep that nice, smooth, clean exhaust note from idle all the way to RPM redline. So there's a lot of science that goes into that. We have been offering that for years over a wide array of variations of vehicles, and the X pipe is phenomenal rather than an H pipe. Now, I'll dive a little bit into an H pipe versus an X. So an H pipe would essentially be 2 independent tubes with a crossover 90 degrees completely perpendicular to those 2 tubes. H pipes are old school, old logic, very big in the domestic market, big blocks, larger cubic inch, larger exhaust tubing, and they're phenomenal for building low-end torque. A little bit older technology. Well, the reason why they're not so effective for more of the mid-range and the top-end power is what happens is at a certain RPM, this crossover tube, so imaginary tube, you have these 2 independent tubes, and then you have this H pipe coming across. What happens is it equalizes and it essentially creates an imaginary force field, so to speak, of gases. So as the exhaust travels by, it becomes ineffective. It no longer works. So it really does nothing for you in terms of more of your mid-range and your top-end power. Unlike the X pipe, it's constantly working to your benefit from idle all the way to red line. It never becomes ineffective. It never pressurizes. It never pushes back. It never creates turbulence. It always does its job effectively as the exhaust travels from the front of the vehicle to the back of the vehicle. We've done a lot of dyno comparisons over the years, H-pipe versus X-pipe, and in every single variation, we have always seen an increase with the X-pipe. We have not lost any low-end torque, and we've seen an additional benefit in the mid-range and the top-end power. So the X-pipe is going to come in two different variations. It's going to come, as you see here, in our 14-inch resonated option, as well as a non-resonated option. The 14-inch resonated option, 14-inch long resonator, bottle style resonator, perforated core, does the exact same effect as a muffler would, except it's a resonator versus a muffler. And if you would like to see a 101 on resonator versus muffler, polished tip versus PVD tip, we definitely like to make an independent video on that. We could dive really into the science of that and what specifically a resonator does versus a muffler. In the event of why we use it, where we specifically use it, in this application, it's designed to cut out interior noise resonance, specifically drone. That drone is synonymous with the automatic transmissions and even more prevalent in the all-wheel drive, specifically the Q50 here. You're going to notice it between 1700, 25 to 2700 RPM. What happens is you drive the car in drive, rather manual mode. You give it partial throttle, upshift, upshift, upshift as you're cruising down the street. And before you know it, you're past 1-to-1. You potentially may be in overdrive before you get to 50, 55 miles an hour. So now what you're doing is that RPM is sitting at that load range, as we like to call it, where you're going to get a ton of exhaust reverberation in the back of the car. What happens is your back window essentially acts as a tuning fork. Exhaust travels through the floorboard because, let's be honest, we don't have the greatest sound deadening in these cars. I mean, what do you expect for the price range? Phenomenally built car from a performance aspect, but they got to sacrifice somewhere here and there. Unfortunately, it comes to sound deadening is where you're going to sacrifice a little bit. So back to topic, exhaust travels through, back window acts as a tuning fork, and essentially you are now sitting inside of this chamber, so to speak, that you're getting this woo, 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 woo. Well, we try to essentially, I did that pretty good, by the way. Probably can't pick it up on camera, but I think I got a good tone here. You are essentially going to reduce, I don't ever want to say eliminate drone. Sound is subjective. We're always going to perceive it differently. What I mean by that is, Tony, at my age, I may jump in the car with one of you and say, that drone's like crazy, and you may be driving it half my age or 2/3 my age and go, this thing's amazing. I don't pick up any drone at all. So we always like to, be cautious here. Say sound is subjective. We're all going to perceive it differently. You may have heard that in previous videos. You're always going to hear us, specifically me, state that out of Fast Intentions. So back to the objective, it's designed to cut down interior noise resonance. I know some of this stuff can be a little dry, a little boring. Hopefully it's appealing to some of you that already have the exhaust, that don't want to take the time to read the bullet points on the website, would rather hear it in the form of a video. So a little bit more technical stuff. It's going to come in full 2.5-inch mandrel bent stainless steel. We'll do a full video one-on-one, crush bent versus mandrel bent. Really not prevalent in today's society in terms of crush bent tubing. Mandrel benders have become very mainstream and a thing of the now. When we started about 20 years ago, it wasn't the case, but we definitely like to dive into a mandrel bending so you at least understand the science behind it, the flow, the aesthetics, and what you're getting for your dollar. So if you have any questions or comments on that, hit me up in the comments section there. Let's talk performance. In conjunction with stock, that's OEM downpipes, uppers and lowers, you're going to pick up about 16 horsepower and 30 foot-pounds of torque. So take this with a grain of salt, because when we came out with this system in 2016 and we dynoed it, nothing else existed. We hadn't prototyped downpipes yet. There were no tunes. So it's going to be a great addition in conjunction with running stock components. Obviously, if you're going to run a lower or a full downpipe in conjunction with a tune, sky's the limit. You're going to make substantial amount more power as well as torque. As all of our components, everything we make here, aside of being aesthetically pleasing, striving for sound greatness, everything is going to perform to optimal level. Our objective is to always maximize low-end torque, mid-range, and top-end power. So keep that in mind. 16 horsepower, 30 foot-pounds of torque, standing on its own with no other additions. Now, let's talk about engine variations. We're going to start newest, make our way back to the oldest, do it a little bit backwards. The most common is the VR30 3-liter twin turbo. That's going to be a 2016 through current model. We'll see how long Infiniti keeps running that out. Let's keep it evergreen. It's also going to fit the 2014 and 15 3.7 liter as well as 3.5 liter HR hybrid engine. You did not hear me wrong. It is not a unicorn. That car does exist. This exhaust system is going to fit those 3 different variations. All can be found on our website. Go ahead and check it out. Now, I got one more thing to show you. Let's talk hardware. So, as we progressed over time, we transitioned to using a Torque clamp rather than everything being a flange connection point. Now, there's always a trade-off of what's better. 2 flanges, a gasket, and hardware, or the ability to use a clamp and have slip fit to be able to fine-tune it for adjustability, bring your tips up and out. It's kind of Ford versus Chevy, right? So there's pros and cons to both. Specifically with these, what we love is that we do have the adjustability, that we don't have to run extra gaskets. If in the build process, we put a little bit more heat on the welding and you got a little bit more shrinkage on the tip, then you go to install it on the car and it's gonna fit where it's gonna fit and you have to bring it out through gaskets. It's kind of a workaround and it works, it's worked for a long time, but really this is the way to do it. This also speeds us up in efficiency of the build process. It's cleaner, it's less labor intensive for our guys. It keeps the cost down slightly. So when we're combating inflation and other things, the clamp is always the way to go. Now we have a specified torque setting on these. It's always listed in our instructions. We have these shims here along with hardware here. This is designed, that cross brace underneath the vehicle, which resides right under the X-pipe. This gives you a little bit more room because you got to keep in mind, you have 2 very small independent tubes that are coming through there factory. Well, we're now using 2 2.5-inch tubes occupying the same amount of space. We don't want any rattles on that cross space, so we have these stainless steel 1/4-inch spacers and we're going to supply you with nickel-plated hardware that's longer to allot for that. One of the very last things to go on in the install process are these 2 1/2-inch shaft collars. These are going to go on your exhaust hangers in the very most aft point. They're essentially there as just a preventative measure to make sure that in the event that you're running the tips out really far and you don't get these as tight as we'd like them, that we don't have any potential mishaps where the rear section falls off. Because you have to understand, when 304 stainless steel gets hot, it expands. And if these aren't exactly tight and the rear section is not installed exactly how we specify, believe it or not, the whole entire rear section could walk itself off. This is a great preventative measure right here to keep that from happening. We have some zip ties for the heat sleeve. This goes over an evap line. The muffler doesn't come in any contact with it. We've always done it as a preventative measure from day one, dating back to the early days. We have our badass gaskets, as I always like to call them. They're gonna go here and here, respectively. They're gonna soak up all the impurities in the metal, as well as we have this fire ring in the center that's gonna do most of your sealing. Now you're gonna retain your factory hardware because you have compression nuts on the back of your OEM lower downpipes, or catalytic converters as we'd call them. They have studs coming out the back, so they'll come through. You'll reuse those compression nuts. Now, in the very back, we made this spreader. It's a nice little custom touch to wrap this up. And what it does is, as your rear section is installed, keep in mind, you don't have a flange in the back that has 2 bolts and 2 holes that are locking it in so it can't rotate. Well, everything is gravity fed, which means what goes up must come down. So over time, the mufflers would essentially want to sag in. That's the weight the gravity's pulling. So we have this spreader that locks in with these 2 stainless steel button head bolts, washers, and nuts, and it locks on these tabs that are located on the sides of the mufflers, on the muffler tubes, and it locks everything in place. So it stays essentially where you put it, and instead of just having this unsightly rod going side to side with these 2 universal holes for adjustability, we decided to have our logo stamped in there. It's a nice little aesthetic piece at the back end of it, and it really cleans it up. So that's all the hardware. This is the details of the exhaust system. Again, I'm Tony with Fast Intentions. Please like, subscribe, share this, comment. Let us know what you like about the reviews, what you'd like to see in the future. We'd love to make that happen. Again, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.